Europe stood on the precipice of a transformation that would shake humanity to its very core. The continent, rich in history and culture, seemed to hold its breath as dark clouds gathered over its sprawling landscapes. In cities like Warsaw, Paris, and Berlin, life appeared ordinary on the surface, yet beneath the daily rhythms, an undercurrent of unease pulsed through every street and alley. People murmured in cafes, markets buzzed with anxious chatter, and families whispered about the distant threat of invasions and the growing tension between nations. Every conversation, every glance, hinted at the looming shadow that would soon engulf Europe in chaos. From the frost-covered plains of Scandinavia to the industrial heartlands of Germany, armies moved with quiet precision, preparing for a conflict whose scale and intensity few could comprehend. Soldiers marched in endless drills, their boots striking the frozen ground in measured cadence. Artillery units rumbled across training fields. Tanks were positioned with tactical care, and the roar of aircraft engines filled the skies above air bases, signaling that war was no longer a distant rumor but an approaching reality. Generals and strategists locked in dimly lit rooms filled with maps and communication devices, plotted campaigns that would soon collide with the unpredictable forces of chance and human will. Every fortress, every border, every railway line was becoming a thread in the vast and complex tapestry of a conflict that promised to redefine the world. Amid this turmoil, old empires wavered. Treaties conceived in times of fragile peace were disregarded, alliances fractured, and leaders walked a precarious path between diplomacy and confrontation. Families in small towns felt the tension in subtle, almost imperceptible ways: a neighbor's sudden absence, the march of soldiers through familiar streets, the distant echo of artillery practice that seemed to signal a foreboding change. The continent's iconic landscapes, medieval castles perched on hills, sprawling factories humming with industry, cobblestone streets winding through historic towns stood as silent witnesses to the anxiety, the anticipation, and the fragile hope that clung to ordinary lives. Winter approached with its cold, biting winds, and the first gusts of conflict began to stir. Intelligence reports hinted at bold strategies, while rumors of invasions and covert movements spread faster than official statements could. Ordinary citizens, from farmers tending frozen fields to shopkeepers in bustling city markets, found themselves caught in forces far larger than their understanding. Decisions made in palaces and war rooms rippled across the continent, touching lives in ways both subtle and profound, shaping destinies before the first major battles had even begun. Courage and fear coexisted in these fragile days. Children ran through streets lined with shadows, their laughter mingling with the distant hum of preparations for war. In homes and schools, whispered conversations speculated about what was to come, while the elderly recounted tales of previous conflicts, trying to instill wisdom and resilience in younger generations. Europe itself seemed to teeter, as if suspended in a moment of time, waiting for the first drop of the storm that would soon cascade across its lands with unstoppable force. And so, as the sun set behind clouded horizons and winter's chill deepened, Europe held its breath. Nations on edge, armies poised, and civilians anxious yet hopeful, all were united in the silent recognition that the world was about to change forever. The first storms of war had begun to gather, relentless and unforgiving, heralding a conflict that would leave no corner untouched and no life unchanged. Long been hidden beneath layers of diplomacy and tradition, ancient empires, once considered unshakable pillars of power, faced the relentless pressures of a changing world. From the palaces of London to the grand halls of Vienna, leaders grappled with the stark reality that the foundations upon which vain nations had stood for centuries were beginning to crumble. Decisions made in haste or under pressure rippled outward, igniting forces that would soon alter the trajectory of history in ways no one could have fully anticipated. In the heartlands of Germany, factories churned day and night, producing weapons and vehicles at a pace that reflected both the ambition and the desperation of a nation poised to assert its dominance. Soldiers trained in harsh conditions, their resolve tested against the bitter cold and the mental strain of endless drills. Across the continent, in nations like Poland and Czechoslovakia, the ground shook with the movements of advancing armies, towns bracing themselves for occupation, and civilians forced to reckon with the terrifying reality that borders could change overnight and lives could be uprooted in an instant. Old alliances began to fracture under the weight of ambition and fear. Leaders who had once pledged mutual support reconsidered their positions, weighed down by political calculations and the pressing demands of survival. Diplomacy, once a subtle dance of negotiation and compromise, gave way to a brutal calculus of strategy and power. In the midst of this turbulence, ordinary people bore the consequences silently. Farmers abandoned fields to serve in militias. Merchants watched as trade routes vanished and families fled homes that had stood for generations, carrying only memories and hope into uncertain futures. Meanwhile, the empires themselves struggled to adapt to the unprecedented scale and speed of modern warfare. Communication lines, intelligence networks, and supply chains were tested like never before. Governments attempted to mobilize resources and inspire loyalty, but cracks in leadership and administrative inefficiency made every decision a gamble. As cities prepared for potential sieges and civilians stocked supplies, a sense of inevitability hung in the Iran unspoken acknowledgement that the old world, with all its hierarchies and traditions, was collapsing under the relentless pressure of change and conflict. Across the seas, global powers watched with apprehension, weighing the implications of Europe's unraveling order. Economic interests, colonial ambitions, and ideological alignments intertwined, creating a web of influence and tension that extended far beyond the continent. In capitals from Washington to Tokyo, policymakers debated interventions, military support, and strategic neutrality. Yet the ripples of Europe's turmoil could not be contained. The fall of empires was no longer a localized tragedy. It was a prelude to a global reshaping, where borders, economies, and lives would all be subject to the sweeping currents of history. Even amidst despair, human resilience surfaced in unexpected places. Secret networks formed to protect the vulnerable, underground resistance movements quietly organized, and ordinary citizens displayed courage in the face of uncertainty. Children learned to navigate streets that could change overnight. Families adapted to shortages and restrictions, and communities found strength in shared hardship. The human spirit, though tested, persisted, a quiet defiance against the shadow of crumbling empires. By the time the first major battles erupted, Europe was unrecognizable. The structures of power, both visible and hidden, had shifted irrevocably. Kings, presidents, and generals were forced to confront the reality that their old maps, strategies, and assumptions were now obsolete. A new world order was taking shape amidst chaos, one born from the ashes of fallen empires and fueled by the relentless momentum of war. The continent, once a symbol of continuity and tradition, now stood as a testament to change, upheaval, and the inescapable consequences of ambition and human folly. The dark clouds that had gathered over Europe finally burst, unleashing a storm that would engulf the entire world. What began as a continental conflict quickly morphed into a global inferno, its flames leaping across oceans and continents, drawing nations far and wide into a war that no one could contain. From the sun-scorched deserts of North Africa to the dense, humid jungles of Southeast Asia, the sounds of war became a universal language. The crack of rifles, the relentless grinding of tank treads, and the deafening roar of aircraft overhead announced a new, terrible reality. No corner of the earth would be spared. The sheer scale of it, all the ambition, the destruction, the raw human courage was almost beyond comprehension. Every strategic decision, every troop movement, every whispered act of resistance was woven into the vast, complex tapestry of a world at war. Back in Europe, the heartland of the conflict, the inferno raged with unmatched ferocity. Cities that were once celebrated as beacons of culture art, and innovation were now consumed by fire. Their skylines illuminated by the orange glow of relentless bombardments. The beautiful streets that had once echoed with laughter and the hustle of daily life became silent. Empty corridors of fear and uncertainty. Civilians, stripped of everything but what they could carry, became a tide of refugees, flowing away from the advancing chaos. The very engines of society were repurposed for destruction. Factories that once produced cars and home goods now churned out tanks, planes, and bullets. Every resource, from steel to rubber to food, was either a weapon in the making or a lifeline for survival. On both sides of the divide, leaders plotted with a mix of calculated cunning and sheer desperation. They understood that the old balance of power was shattered, and that the fate of entire nations hung on the outcomes of the coming months. Across the vast expanse of the Atlantic, the sleeping giant had awakened. The United States, once a distant observer, accelerated its entry into the war, transforming its industrial might into an arsenal for the Allied cause. Production lines surged with unprecedented speed, churning out ships, aircraft, and munitions at a staggering rate. The nation's ports, once hubs of commerce, became bustling nerve centers of military mobilization. A generation of young men and women answered the call, undergoing rigorous training to prepare for battles on foreign shores they had only read about in books. Behind the scenes, a shadow war was being waged. Intelligence networks worked tirelessly, gathering the vital information that could turn the tide of a battle, or even the entire war. Allied nations, bound by a common enemy, began to coordinate their strategies, sharing knowledge, equipment, and, most importantly, hope. Yet, despite this newfound unity, a deep-seated uncertainty remained. A victory in one part of the world was often met with a devastating setback in another, a painful reminder of just how interconnected the global stage had become. Meanwhile, the war in the Pacific presented a completely different set of challenges. Here, the battlefield wasn't defined by trenches and front lines, but by vast, empty stretches of ocean and countless tiny islands. These once tranquil island chains were transformed into heavily armed fortresses, strategic stepping stones in a brutal island-hopping campaign. The world's most powerful naval fleets, marvels of engineering and firepower, moved like predators across the ocean, engaging in titanic clashes that would decide control over vital sea lanes. The war from the air was just as brutal, with carrier-based planes launching devastating raids. Amphibious assaults saw soldiers storming beaches under withering fire, while covert operations unfolded in the shadows. For the ordinary people living in these regions, the war brought unimaginable hardship. Their homes became battlegrounds, their lives upended by forces beyond their control. Yet, amidst the chaos and suffering, incredible stories of resilience, compassion, and courage began to emerge. People found ways to survive, to protect their families, and to resist the invaders, becoming the silent, unsung heroes in a world engulfed by flames. The psychological toll of this global conflict grew heavier with each passing day. News of the war traveled through the crackle of radio broadcasts, the bold headlines of newspapers, and the tear-stained ink of personal letters, connecting those on the home front directly to the distant battle lines. Families gathered around the radio, their hearts pounding as they listened for reports, praying for good news, but bracing for the worst. Societies everywhere wrestled with the profound moral and emotional consequences of the conflict. The daily reports of victories and losses of strategies succeeding and failing served as a constant, sobering reminder that no one, no matter how far from the fighting, was truly untouched by the war's relentless reach. Life had to adapt. In homes, schools, and workplaces, people learned to live with a constant undercurrent of uncertainty. A new kind of resilience was forged, even in the youngest generations who learned far too quickly that survival required both caution and courage in equal measure. The fire of this war showed no discrimination. It burned through the old certainties of power, redrawing the political maps of the world and demanding extraordinary, heartbreaking sacrifices from everyone who lived through it. Nations that had stood for centuries fell in a matter of weeks, while others rose to new prominence. Cities were reduced to rubble, and the very fabric of civilization seemed to be tearing apart. But through it all, one thing shone through the overwhelming adversity: the unwavering strength of human courage. As the conflict spread to every corner of the globe, it became clear that this was no ordinary war. It was a crucible, a trial by fire, testing the endurance, the intelligence, and the very spirit of humanity itself. And yet, even in the darkest, most desperate hours, flickers of hope refused to be extinguished. They were found in the daring acts of resistance movements, in the simple solidarity between strangers, and in the unyielding determination of ordinary people to endure. They were a powerful reminder that fire, while terrifyingly destructive, can also illuminate new paths toward survival, justice, and eventual renewal. The globe burned, and the world was reshaped by conflict. Yet the human spirit, scarred but unbroken, endured, ready to carry the hard-won lessons of the inferno into the uncertain days that lay ahead. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey through history compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next one. After years of relentless conflict, a profound change began to stir across the war-torn globe. The seemingly unstoppable tide of destruction, which had swept across continents and redrawn the maps of nations, was finally meeting a powerful countercurrent. This was the moment when determination, brilliant strategy, and sheer human resilience started to push back against the darkness. In Europe, the change was almost tangible. Cities that had long languished under occupation began to hear the steady, rhythmic advance of Allied forces. For soldiers hardened by years of brutal combat, this was a new chapter. They moved with a renewed sense of purpose, not just as conquerors, but as liberators. With every town reclaimed, with every village freed, a wave of hope spread through populations that had known nothing but scarcity, fear, and oppression. Each small victory broadcast across borders became a symbol of a future that was no longer just a distant dream. Behind the front lines, a revolution in strategy was unfolding. Commanders, armed with better intelligence and innovative tactics, began to orchestrate operations with a new level of precision. What once seemed like impossible missions were now being achieved, not through brute force alone, but through meticulous coordination, deep insight, and the incredible courage of the men and women executing these plans. The Axis powers, accustomed to setting the pace of the war, found themselves on the defensive, reacting to a united coalition driven by a single, powerful goal: to end the tyranny and restore balance to a fractured world. Meanwhile, across the vast expanse of the Pacific, the long and grueling struggle for control of islands, seas and skies was also beginning to shift. The naval battles, once defined by shocking surprise attacks, were now met with carefully calculated maneuvers and superior intelligence. The Allied forces were learning the rhythm of this new kind of warfare. By capturing strategic airfields, severing critical supply lines, and launching coordinated assaults, they demonstrated that no fortress, no matter how remote, was beyond their reach. For the civilians caught in the crossfire, these victories were more than just military gains. They were the first glimmers of safety, the first signs that a return to some form of normal life might finally be possible. Back in Europe, the physical and emotional scars of war ran deep. Cities were landscapes of rubble, a testament to years of bombardment and occupation. Yet, amidst the devastation, something remarkable was happening. Communities were beginning to rebuild, not just with bricks and mortar, but with spirit and resolve. Resistance movements, once scattered and forced into the shadows, were now finding new strength in coordination. They became a vital force, supporting the advancing armies and, just as importantly, restoring a sense of agency and morale to their oppressed countrymen. In the streets that had been silenced by fear, the sound of children playing began to return a simple, beautiful melody of defiance. Families dared to dream again of a future free from the constant shadow of war. It was a powerful reminder that the human spirit, even when tested to its absolute limits, possesses an extraordinary capacity for resilience. Of course, this turning of the tide was not without a heavy price. Every inch of ground gained, every strategic advantage secured, was paid for with immense courage and heartbreaking loss. The path forward was fraught with peril. Soldiers and civilians alike faced unimaginable dangers. Communication lines were constantly at risk, and the threat of attack still loomed over every city. The lesson was stark and universal. Victory is never simply given. It is earned through sweat, sacrifice, and an unbreakable will to survive. As another winter descended upon the world, the shift in momentum was undeniable. The Axis powers, though still a formidable force, were confronted with the stark reality that their advance had been halted. Their dominance was being challenged at every turn, and a sense of inevitability began to creep in. History was poised to record these moments as the beginning of the end for their reign of oppression. A new feeling was in the air, a collective understanding that the long, dark night of war might finally be giving way to the first light of dawn. This was more than just a change in battlefield fortunes. It was a shift in destiny. Across Europe, the Pacific, and beyond, people felt it. The conflict was still raging, but the shadow of hope was growing longer with each passing day. Ordinary people, soldiers on the front lines, leaders in their war rooms, and strategists poring over maps all understood the significance of this moment. The turning tide was a profound testament to the power of resilience, courage, and collective determination. It was a promise that, even from the deepest darkness, humanity could find a way to rise from the ashes and build a new future. Thank you so much for watching. If this story of resilience and hope resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the pivotal moments that have shaped our world. We'll see you in the next one. Victory seemed so close, almost within our grasp. But this light of triumph was different. It cast long, dark shadows that stretched over every battlefield, every city, and every home. Across the world, nations began to celebrate as the tide of war finally turned. Armies surged forward, and lands that had suffered under occupation started to breathe again, hearing the footsteps of liberation. But behind the celebratory banners and waving flags, the true cost of this war was coming into focus. Think about it. Communities were shattered, families were ripped apart, entire landscapes were scarred by years of relentless, brutal conflict. The joy of victory was always mixed with a heavy heart, a quiet understanding that every single gain was built on a foundation of loss, sacrifice, and a transformation that would last long after the final shots were fired. In Europe, the liberation of cities that had been choked by fear was a powerful symbol of hope. Imagine streets that once echoed with the sounds of occupation now filled with the cautious, hopeful steps of people returning to what was left of their homes. Rebuilding began almost immediately, but the skeletons of bombed-out buildings stood as stark permanent reminders of just how vulnerable we are when ambition goes unchecked. The soldiers marching through these cities felt a mix of pride and profound grief. They knew that each step forward was another line in a story written with both incredible courage and unimaginable suffering. And this wasn't just a European story. Half a world away, in Asia and the Pacific, the final, brutal phases of the war showed just how global this conflict truly was. Massive naval campaigns, relentless aerial assaults, and bloody ground offensives had completely reshaped entire regions. Strategic victories did bring liberation, but they also left communities struggling with shortages, displacement, and annoying uncertainty about the future. Yet, even in the darkest moments, the human spirit proved to be astonishingly resilient. In the shadows of destroyed buildings and scorched fields, people began the slow, painful process of piecing their lives back together. They found small, quiet victories in the simple acts of survival, in the bonds of solidarity with their neighbors, and in the tentative, fragile return of something resembling normalcy. It's a testament to our ability to endure, to find light even when surrounded by darkness. At the same time, the entire geopolitical map was being redrawn. Governments that had survived the storm started to plan for the monumental task of reconstruction. They had to figure out how to govern territories that had just been liberated or were completely devastated. The alliances that were forged in the heat of battle began to evolve, becoming the blueprints for post-war cooperation. The world was forced to recognize that this colossal struggle for power had left permanent marks, not just on borders and political institutions, but on the very soul of nations and on our collective memory. Leaders faced an immense challenge. They had to enforce order and security, but also nurture hope for a better future. They were acutely aware that the decisions they made in those critical moments would shape the world for generations to come. It was a heavy burden to bear, balancing the immediate needs of a broken world with the long-term vision for a lasting peace. But even with these strategic successes, the shadows of war lingered everywhere. The memories of loss, of being forced from your home, of the daily struggle for survival, these memories haunted every corner of the globe. Soldiers returned, but the homes and communities they came back to were forever changed. Families were reunited, but often their joy was tinged with grief for those who were missing, and uncertainty for what lay ahead. The triumph of one nation often stood in stark contrast to the utter devastation of another. This revealed the complex, messy, and uneven nature of victory. The world was slowly learning that victory isn't just about gaining territory or defeating an enemy. It's about the fragile, painstaking process of healing, of reconciliation, and of rebuilding a world that has been forever altered by conflict. And yet, amid these deep shadows, courage continued to shine brightly. It wasn't just the courage of soldiers on the battlefield, but the quiet courage of individuals, communities, and nations who found strength in resilience and compassion. There was a shared understanding that the future had to be built on the lessons of the past, no matter how painful. Education, communication, and reconstruction became the most vital tools for transforming war-torn societies into places where hope could actually grow again. We learned, slowly and painfully, that the cost of triumph is inseparable from the hard work required to preserve peace, to honor the immense sacrifice, and to rebuild a world capable of moving beyond conflict. It's a lesson that we must never, ever forget. As the final battles drew to a close, the world finally began to grasp the sheer enormity of what had happened. The flames of global conflict had dimmed, but their echoes remained, lingering in the landscapes, in our memories, and in the institutions we created to prevent it from happening again. Those long shadows of victory stretched far and wide, serving as a constant, sobering reminder that every triumph is linked to loss. Every celebration is shadowed by the burdens of history, and that the path forward requires courage, reflection, and an unwavering dedication to rebuilding what was so nearly lost forever. Thank you so much for joining me on this reflection. It's a heavy topic, but an important one. If this resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more content that explores the deeper stories of our shared history. Your support means the world. Stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one. The echoes of war, once a deafening roar, have finally begun to fade, leaving behind a world forever transformed. Imagine cities, once choked by smoke and buried under rubble, now stirring with the slow, deliberate work of rebuilding. Nations, weary to their very core from years of relentless conflict, are charting new paths toward recovery. They grapple with the sheer scale of the destruction, while daring to envision a future defined not by conquest, but by cooperation. The maps we once knew have been redrawn. Across Europe, Asia, and beyond, borders have shifted. Global powers have been redefined, and entire societies have been fundamentally altered. It's a world both familiar and strange, a landscape of loss and nascent hope. But amid the ruins, the most powerful force of all endured: the human spirit. Survivors, though bearing the deep marks of loss and hardship, are showing a resilience that is nothing short of extraordinary. All around, communities are coming together, brick by brick, to restore homes, schools, and markets. Listen closely, and you can hear the sounds of life returning. Children, who grew up knowing only fear and uncertainty, are now playing in streets that are slowly, steadily regaining their rhythm. Ordinary citizens, once just cogs in the vast machinery of global conflict, have emerged as the true architects of renewal. They are bringing creativity, sheer determination, and a desperate, beautiful hope to a world that needs it more than anything. It's a testament to the idea that even in the darkest of times, the drive to build, to create, and to connect can never be extinguished. Of course, the task facing governments is immense. How do you establish stability in lands that have been liberated or utterly devastated? Leaders, haunted by the mistakes and tragedies of the past, are trying to forge new alliances, ones capable of preventing such a catastrophe from ever happening again. International bodies, national institutions, and local administrations are working around the clock. Their mission: rebuild infrastructure, restore economies, and create systems of justice to address both the immediate needs of the people and the long-term lessons of the war. Diplomacy, once a quiet voice drowned out by the drums of war, is now taking center stage. It has become the cornerstone in the monumental effort to construct a peace that will actually last. Yet, we cannot and should not forget the scars. The staggering loss of life, the millions displaced, the trauma that so many endure. These things cannot be undone. The memory of the devastation lingers in the landscapes, in the archives, and in our collective consciousness. But these shadows are not just a source of pain. They have become our guide. They are a constant, powerful reminder that vigilance, compassion, and cooperation are not just lofty ideals, they are essential for our survival. They are the tools we must use to ensure that history's most destructive chapters are never repeated. The world has learned a hard lesson. While war can destroy cities and topple nations, it can never entirely extinguish the human capacity for hope, ingenuity, and unity. And with this understanding, new opportunities are beginning to bloom. Think about it. Technological advancements that were born from the necessities of war are now being repurposed for civilian life, driving progress in unimaginable ways. Trade routes are reopening, and with them, the revival of cultural exchange. Knowledge that was once harnessed for destruction is now fueling progress, innovation, and a better quality of life for all. Societies are recognizing the absolute imperative to nurture education, to foster innovation, and to strengthen human connection. The lessons learned in the depths of adversity are now guiding future generations toward a more harmonious world. It's a slow, difficult process, but it's happening. As the sun rises over these recovering cities, fields, and oceans, we can begin to glimpse the faint outline of a new era. This new world isn't just a new map or a new political reality. It's a concept, a vision of possibility that has been forged in the ashes of conflict. You can see it in the cautious hands that nations are extending to one another. You can feel it in the communities seeking reconciliation and healing. And you can hear it in the whispers of individuals who, against all odds, dare to hope that the future can embody the courage, resilience, and unity that sustained them through the darkest of times. This dawn is fragile, there's no doubt about it. But in this new light, the true legacy of the war becomes clear. The world was tested in the most brutal way imaginable, and though it was deeply wounded, it survived. From that devastation, the incredible potential for renewal has risen. This new world, though imperfect and tentative, stands as a testament to humanity's enduring spirit. It is a profound promise that even after the most destructive storms, life, hope, and progress can, and will, rise once more. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through history and hope. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content that explores the powerful forces that shape our world. Your support means everything. I'll see you next time.